Our story, the one that defines us, spins a tale of chapters that reveal the origin of our why. Join me in exploring the narratives of changemakers who rise to the moment more often than not, and who are defined not by their achievements, but by the storylines they believe in. Join me, Dr. Rod Berger, as I integrate my new book about storytelling into a conversation that meets the moment. This is The Narrative Edge, a podcast under the banner of Headroom with Dr. Rod Berger, presented by our friends at Rig Productions. And now, onto our show. Welcome to another episode of The Narrative Edge. I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger. I don't know what is going on, but recently I have been interviewing people who have a fantastic relationship with the boundaries that most of us set on ourselves with the physical world and that of possibility or dreaming of possibilities. And they've sort of shattered the notion that there are sort of rules to the world around us in a way that really bends the imagination from really the essence of an explorer. And I think that's what's fascinating about today is those horizon lines yet to be explored. And funny enough, there are people out there that continue to dream in ways that I think many of us, me included, haven't really fathomed, whether it's in the dark of night or during our conscious day. I'm really excited to spend some time today with Richard Browning. He is an internationally renowned British entrepreneur, inventor, and speaker, and he is best known as the founder and CEO of Gravity Industries and creator of the world's first human jet suit. Let me say it again, the world's first human jet suit. Since launching in 2017, he has redefined what's possible in human flight, pushing the boundaries of innovation, engineering, and human performance to inspire a generation to also dare ask, what if? Inspired by his late father, an aeronautical engineer and maverick innovator, Richard, a former Royal Marines reservist, built Gravity from a small British startup to an $80 million global symbol of cutting-edge technology and human potential. Today, Gravity has transformed Special Forces mobility and advanced remote medical response, and its flight events have been seen by over 2 billion people worldwide. Over 300 flights in more than 50 countries have taken place, from corporate showcases to military demonstrations in Gravity's inaugural Dubai International Race Series. Before Richard founded Gravity, he spent 16 years as a commodity trader with BP, where he pioneered a $500 million cargo tracking concept that forever changed the international commodity trading and shipping worlds, adding to a background of combining technical ingenuity with sharp commercial acumen, the DNA of any true modern entrepreneur. Richard, I wanted to give that thorough background. I know it's exhausting. I just gave a little TED talk there on you.
Yeah, thank you. We're done, aren't we?
But it's so. I think it's really important because I know your father. I believe that Thomas and Oliver they're inching closer and closer to 20, leaving their teens here in a few years, if I'm correct. And I have two children that are just behind them at 13 and 11, right? So they're sort of looking up and seeing the bottoms of the shoes of the Olivers and the Thomases of the world as they start to look at different horizon lines that they do currently with regards to my kids. But I think it's really important because I've been seeing more and more that this notion of hope and dreams is changing in a world of AI, maybe not of our own doing or our own request. And I think it's really imperative for all of us to basically provide platform and opportunity for stories like yours to not only take shape, but to continue to evolve over time in any way or form that you see fit. Because this to me is real life dreaming in a way that we can think about all times during the day, as I said in my open. Where do you sit? Talk a little bit about just the notion and the relationship of dreaming and how that has changed over the arc of the initial concept of human flight for you.
Gosh, there's so much to unpack there. So much. Even before AI, I'm slightly concerned with how social media, I think, has started to erode that childlike passion and joy that you probably had as I did when you dream as a kid of doing something, and it's not just immediately accessible. But I mean, look, we can go off down that road if you want in a bit. There's another tangent to what you've just inspired me to think here, which is actually the role of science fiction, Marvel and DC, for instance, in genuinely inspiring creativity. I think if you pause any concern for known physics or any concern for any commercial structure or business rationale, then you've got science fiction. I don't care about physics and money. I'm just going to believe I can be strong or fly or go green or whatever I want to imagine. And actually, I think that's got a really powerful role. So when it comes to our journey, yeah, I dared imagine something that didn't at the time exist, that I just thought might be possible. And I think I'd done enough things in my career and life up to that point, very much inspired by a maverick father, to recognize this really obvious but really powerful truth that things go from impossible and surely not feasible to actually a reality suddenly very quickly if you just persevere through the status quo, relentless setback thinking to jumble up a whole load of concepts. It's ridiculous. As soon as suddenly, catching a space rocket back with a giant grab as it's returned its way back to Earth is suddenly not impossible anymore. And yet a few years ago, most of us would never have even thought twice about imagining that as a feasible concept. So I really do think that human value of dreaming and imagining the impossible, daring to imagine what's over the horizon, daring to imagine the some concept that is only a dream, that is so valuable and has got us to where we've got to now. I mean, for better or worse, and we've got to keep clinging to that. And I do think that, as you kind of touched on in your intro, I mean, AI is in danger of just pushing us to the back and going, hang on, look, AI's got this. AI can far more powerfully imagine things we can't even conceive of. So don't worry, humans, the baton is passed. I think that's really sad if we end up in that kind of mode.
How have you found that I want to in a moment pivot to your maverick, your father. I just love that notion and that description. How do you understand, it's like we want to avoid being the frog in the pot, right? That's slowly boiling. How do you think about it or keep yourself sort of honest with yourself as sort of an ongoing audit to understand, in one sense, the power of AI, or let's even just say a world that is changing to a point where we can ideate around things we would have never thought possible even just a few years ago. How do you keep yourself in check so that curiosity that you have is stimulated in a way where the next idea might hit you tonight or tomorrow or in a year, as opposed to feeling as if you've sort of gone off the freeway without intention, wondering, how did I end up on the side of the road when I was really feeling creative and inspired by being in the left lane of life previously?
Yeah, I think I'm less concerned for myself and my generation, our generation. I think we've got a luxurious position of having grown up. One sort of wonderful thing, actually, interestingly on Instagram, talking about, if you grew up in the 70s, which I just did, I'm born in 79, and you grew up through the 80s, then, all your parents said is just make sure you're back for tea, they didn't, and if you dared say you were bored, they would say to you, right, well, I've got, 3 or 4 chores you can get on with. This ability to take responsibility, manage risk, fall out of trees, and realize, that you could engage with recoverable risk, take responsibility, dare to dream and explore and make your own entertainment. All of those things. I think having grown up with that and then being gifted with the kind of technologies we now have around us, I think we've got this wonderful opportunity to stick it all together. And I mean, I've got an AI startup, just because I thought that would be an interesting thing to explore, get my hands dirty and play with it. I'm more concerned about the younger generations and the responsibility we have, by the sounds of it, both to our gradually growing up children and the younger generations, to try and offer up to them ingredients that give them the same tools and opportunities we've got. Because I do sort of see, at risk of sounding like a Luddite, and maybe we're all wrong, and maybe it's just the latest in a long, conveyor belt of interesting technology we think is going to end the world. But AI does feel kind of different. But I think there's an opportunity of using the tools that gives to actually enhance creativity and enhance your imagination and enhance your speed of exploration. I think that's the way we've got to look at it. I think that's a more constructive mindset than just sitting back and doing what I dared and fear just a second ago, which is, well, we just check out and let AI do it all. I do think we've got to try and inspire the next generations. I mean, through even doing this, we've got to try and shine a light on how they can make the best of this dazzling array of tools and distractions and opportunities that is now being, now bombarding them.
As I mentioned just a moment ago, I'd love to pivot to your father, because I really want to understand the relationship and sort of get an idea of your late father. So take me back to a memory that would sort of encapsulate when you describe him as a maverick father, and the relationship between father and son, where my hunch is that not only were you sort of given an example of just having a creative mind, sort of run wild in all these incredible ways, but that you were given your own sort of playground emotionally to not only see that, but then think for yourself in this sort of independent agency building manner. And I'm just curious if there's an image or a memory or something that you guys would do on a Saturday morning that it might not have said innovation, but something about that kind of lit the match.
There's so much about my childhood that resonates ever more, as I grow up and I watch my children grow up. So for context, he was an aeronautical engineer, maverick inventor, creator, designer. He actually gave up a perfectly good day job to pursue a number of different passions around bicycles. Actually, he was always fascinated by bicycles because when you really think about it, it is an amazing, till you start making it complicated with electrification and everything. But at its essence, it's an amazing, very basic piece of equipment that supersizes human capability, especially when you've got a road involved. And he was always fascinated. He invented a really interesting folding bike, and he was one of the major pioneers of mountain bike suspension. And I grew up around him, building things, making things in his sort of double garage workshop. He unknowingly created the perfect environment of not like jumping in and getting involved too deeply with my projects. He would just lay out the ingredients that I could discover for myself. And again, back in even that day, and I tried to do this fairly successfully with my children. They all have their own fingers still. Let them make mistakes and learn how to use angle grinders and chop saws and all these terrifying things that as a parent, you have to wince and look the other way, hoping you've given them just enough instruction that they've, maybe constructively, mildly burnt themselves with the occasional soldering iron or cut themselves a little bit with a file or whatever. All the little bits, which I realize in hindsight, my father allowed me to do, which means you have that risk management mindset. That means you don't go and lose a finger to a chop saw or whatever. And I think my father laid out that in a wonderful way and unknowingly gave a huge amount of responsibility and trust to me. So bought me my first little air rifle when I was, I don't know, about 7 or something, which especially in the UK is really unusual. You probably have a shotgun by then.
Sounds very American.
In the US. But, anyway, he not only laid out that environment that I could play and explore, he also did wonderful things like whenever an electrical device, particularly, or any device in the house broke, we'd try and fix it, or he'd let me try and fix it, and usually it wouldn't work. And so then I'd be allowed to take it apart. And I remember very fondly laying out an enormous kind of dust sheet on the lounge living room floor. And we had this old cathode ray TV. And he just said, right, go and see how it works, take it apart. And I remember just dismantling this thing. Turns out this is really dangerous. You shouldn't do this because they have a lot of charge left in their capacitors. Anyway, I didn't electrocute myself. But what I did do is tap the back end of the cathode ray tube with a hammer because it looked very kind of fragile. And I remember tapping it that one last time, and there was what felt like an implosion. It was the vacuum inside the cathode ray tube. This is all witchcraft to most people listening to this probably. This is before flat screen LCD type TVs. And the vacuum imploded. Now, actually, it's quite a safe explosion because it sucks all the bits in. But anyway, it felt like my eyeballs were coming out with that momentary loss of air pressure. But anyway, I had this wonderful childhood of just exploring and making and creating and building. And it kind of, I suppose, accidentally taught me that there's no real boundaries and you can explore and discover and play. And some of the creations I ended up with were really quite fun for a small kid.
What did it smell like in that double garage that he would work out of?
Yeah, remarkably similar to, I was just on a military exercise and we were crawling around the inside of an old massive military ship, and that sort of diesel oil, greasy fuel smell of an engine room of a ship, it smelt a bit like that. That's a really good question. The inevitable burnt smell of some electrical components that had cooked, and yeah, it's the kind of thing where when you smell it again, you're instantly there. We're not gifted with very many good words to properly manifest smells, are we? Really, from a memory point of view. But that is a great question. Hard to describe.
Have you found yourself, Richard, that's maybe not the right word, but have you found yourself reconstructing some elements of that experience in the garage with your dad in different areas or chapters of your life, if you sort of look back in hindsight?
Yeah. I actually, yes, more so than I've just realized. I love it when I do it. I've done a lot of interviews over the years, and I love it when occasionally, and you've just scored twice now, I get a question that genuinely surprises me and amuses me and makes me think differently. I always feel like interviews, TV interviews, documentaries, doing a book and doing podcasts, it's like little bite-sized sort of Oprah Winfrey self-evaluation, right? I've learned a lot more about my past through these kind of things than I ever imagined. I've been just doing a bit of a big sort out. We've got a lot of barns on this 50-acre estate. It used to be a farm, and we've now got this amazing headquarters and buildings like this as a museum to what we do. And there's still an old load of stables where we use as engineering kind of rooms for some of the more rough work, creative work, not in the snazzy HQ we've got. And I was just sorting out a lot of it today. And actually, I'm still very much delivering on the setup that my father had on a much smaller scale. He would have loved this, where you just keep just the critical amount of weird little, not like hoarder levels of crap, but you just keep the little knickknacks and bits and pieces that might just be useful one day when you're trying to prototype something. You think, that will be amazing to go and use to recreate or to experiment with the concept. And actually, this whole museum is full of examples of how that was the essence of how we built the first jet suits. They used to use the triggers from electric drills as the throttle, and we used to use the child backpack that you take your kid hiking on when they're like, I don't know, 3 or 4. Maybe 2 or 3. We used to use that backpack structure in some of these jet suits behind me. So it's still, you're very right. I'm still living, I suppose I'm still delivering on the same spirit of keeping lots of interesting, inspiring bits of mechanical or electrical equipment that can go to being the inspiration behind a prototype that could lead who knows where. I'm still doing that.
So I have noticed, and maybe it's the interviewing sort of world or storytelling world, that there are the incredible technology where you can sort of say, if I could sit down with Martin Luther King Jr. or, whoever, and sort of name the historical figure, you can sort of aggregate all this information, speeches, writings, and actually create this conversation, which sort of blows the mind a little bit. And I actually had a friend out of Dubai that did that. He sent me a clip of me speaking with Martin Luther King Jr. and you just sort of watch it on repeat, saying this something feels off in this. But so I think the norm, maybe the typical question would be something like, Richard, if you could sit down with your dad now, what would you talk about? Right. I think a flip of that would be, what would you be curious to ask him now, after the influx of success at sort of all these different levels? Like, what would you be curious to ask him outside of the limelight, when people sort of ooh and ah when they see you in a jet suit flying around, you or your team? What would you be curious to ask him, and would it really have anything to do with the actual company itself? I'd be curious.
Yeah. So I've come to realize one of those aha moments from doing many interviews was this realization that a lot of what has motivated me in life was trying to deliver on his unfulfilled ambition. Because I mean, the punchline, the sad punchline conclusion to his life story was that, yes, he had all the innovative entrepreneurial spirit and the engineering talent, but as I know now from sitting here with this business around me, that's only a fraction of the challenge. You either have got to be very lucky to surround yourself with skill sets of everything to do with setting up a business, everything from finance to marketing to managing people to all of these other skills, or you've got to have some of those talents yourself, or ideally both of those things. And for one reason or another, he just ended up getting screwed around with so much that he ended up, taking his own life when I was 15 on that journey. And I think, strangely, that experience left in me this burning desire, unknown, unconscious burning desire to go and fulfill on that ambition. Because I was around him the whole time. He was always talking about, gosh, we could, go and buy a helicopter, have a bigger house, when we're successful and we're millionaires and whatever. I mean, he didn't go on about it all the time, but that was the you could taste the ambition in the air. And I was around it the whole time, and I could see his energy and his efforts, and it just never got quite over the line, and then ultimately spiraled into this mess. So I think a lot of being around that, I've been driven to try and fulfill that unfulfilled desire, unfulfilled ambition. So to answer your question, I would love to see to what extent would he have enjoyed watching this pathway, and to what extent has it scratched that itch. I think if it was me watching my son do that, I mean, I think it's still not quite as good as you doing it, but I think it's as close as you can get. And I think I'd like to think he'd be very proud of what we've done. It would be so up his street, this. I mean, he loved flight. He was passionate about trying to learn to hang glide. He never got an opportunity to. He was quite a physical kind of guy, outdoorsy kind of guy. He was fascinated by looking at the birds in the air and thinking just how, amazing their design is, if you like. And I mean, there's so many elements that are in this. I think I would love to, and I wish I'd have got the opportunity to sit with him and show him what we've done, get an opportunity, because you can learn to fly these. We've had like 1,000 people in this equipment in the US and UK. I'd love to give him that chance of trying it, feeling it, discussing it, exploring it, shooting the breeze with all sorts of ideas of how you could take it further. It's all of that, really, I think. Yeah.
Given that you brought it up, and with great respect, I'm so curious, because I was going to ask you anyway. I was to understand this. It's almost like an explorer mentality. You mentioned sort of like it's not Marvel characters and these sorts of things earlier. How do you understand, or how do you square the balance between the brilliance of innovation and thinking without boundaries, as it sounds like your father did, and the edge that can come on quite quickly? And if you're not constituted or have the right supports or whatever, it might sort of spin out of control, like you were mentioning with your father. Like, how do you understand that in a way that says, I don't mean that you're aware for yourself, but I would think it does sort of color in the lines. It makes the picture broader and deeper for you in a way to understand that creative genius and around innovation.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm going to answer your question entirely, but let me speak to it, because you are highlighting a really important thing that I am super passionate about trying to promote as a sort of a byproduct from this journey. I believe that innovation and entrepreneurship, particularly innovation, that often clumsy, failure-ridden pathway of daring to imagine something that currently is impossible, that you believe might end up being possible, but probably 19 out of 20 of your attempts at this journey will be proving the skeptics right. Okay, innovation is really hard. It's about spending more time failing. It's about more time getting things wrong than it is getting things right. And yet we've got a society that is hell-bent on making failure unforgiven. In school, in university, in higher education, in corporate life, in government life, failure is considered bad. If you get 9 out of 10, well, great, but you should really get 10 out of 10. There's this culture we've got now which says failure is a bad thing, and yet it is the fuel of innovation. So I've been thinking really hard for about a decade, how the hell do you try and square this? And I think the answer is this, that firstly, you've got to recognize that failure and making mistakes is a critical ingredient to innovation. And innovation itself has fueled our entire Western world. And frankly, the Chinese have picked up the baton now far more aggressively than we have, sadly. And it's what literally keeps the lights on and keeps gives our children a chance at a prosperous future. And we've got to rediscover it. But it's driven by failure. It's driven by getting things wrong. But there is a rule that really, really helps here. And this is what, like I say, I've tried to distill. You've just simply got to make the inevitable failures associated with innovation recoverable. And I feel this very passionately because my father didn't, right? He ultimately died on the altar of trying to get this right, and he didn't. So if you're going to be innovative, if you're going to try and set up a startup, if you're going to try and reinvent the washing machine or dare to go to Mars or just come up with a piece of code that becomes a startup that ends up paying for your kids to go to college, everything in between. You've just simply got to make the inevitable failures and setbacks on that journey recoverable. You've got to keep being able to get back up again from all the inevitable setbacks and failures from three perspectives: a financial perspective, a reputation perspective, and in many cases, but not all, a safety perspective. You don't win any prizes if the attempt number 5 runs you out of money and you can't carry on, puts you in prison, or you lose your job, or you just get ostracized in some way from the community you're supposed to be part of. And the third one is, if you hurt anybody or yourself, let alone kill anybody, this is not a survivable, sustainable pathway. If we could only get our governments, our institutions, our corporations, and even our school kids to embrace this little rule set that go dare, dream, and imagine something impossible, but just don't go and burn the place down, run out of money, or get kicked out of where you are, then just keep iterating. It's about recoverable failure. And I feel like that's the thing that my father didn't get right. He borrowed too much money. He borrowed money from his family, which makes it even worse when it goes wrong. He just didn't have an off-ramp in case his idea, in case his pathway wasn't survivable. And I think that's what we've got to try and highlight and promote. Our generation that has enjoyed these last decades of going on these amazing journeys, we've got to try and get that into our schools and into our institutions and into our governments, half of which don't seem to have ever built a business or gone on this journey. So yeah, there you go. That wasn't probably answering your question, but I feel very about that.
I concur with your position on that. I think it's incredibly important. And speaking of which, it sort of lends itself to support systems and the ecosystems and sort of how alive they are as an entrepreneur continues on their journey, right? I'm so curious as to how your relationships outside of your family have changed over the last decade. Because I've been very lucky to spend time in person and remotely with some really incredible people that have done some fantastic things for our planet, in the advancement of all things technology and being human. And I always find that the further they get in their idea and bringing it to life, almost the more distance that's created between themselves and connection between other humans, not because they don't want that, but because people look at them differently. They see them as either an object of opportunity, they see them as something that they can't measure up to, so they don't get close as they might have otherwise. How have you reconciled sort of the ownership of, you've done something incredible with your group, and I get this from doing background on you, that you're humble. It's not just sort of a me approach in this regard, right? It takes a village to achieve. But I'm just wondering how you have understood that, because it's funny, younger people, that's a question that I'll get when, like a couple of weeks ago, I was talking with 5th graders and they wanted to know about some people that I interviewed, and they were very curious about really the friendship side of it. Like how do their communities change? To them, it's the more famous or more accomplished. And I'm just wondering how that's been for you.
Yeah. So for me personally, I mean, I'm somebody who I guess because I witnessed what I did with my father, and because I know just how damn hard it's been to get to where we've got to, and I've scaled several other startups and failed a lot. I'm not very good at forgetting about the failures. So I feel always very humble, very genuinely grateful, and very mindful of how close failure has been so many times. So I don't find it very hard to be, to be very humble. It's not a stretch. I'm much more comfortable being that person than I am letting somehow my ego go large. I mean, it's lovely how people describe what we do as a bit like the Iron Man story, and therefore me, Tony Stark, and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I'm not a billionaire, but I like. Even that film showed him having his humble moment. He had to go back to, I mean, there's so many lovely parts about that first film. It's not why I built this company or why I built a jet suit, but I do find most people really resonate from so many walks of life, that first Iron Man film, because it's got every part of a story arc. The successful billionaire gets massively humbled. He has to genuinely, on raw talent alone and perseverance, MacGyver his way out of a cave, for people who remember that word, name, and then goes back to doing all the fun billionaire stuff. But anyway, I'm trying to save the world as well as a byproduct. But To go back to what you were saying, we are afflicted very much in Europe and the UK by a worse version of what you're touching on. If you're successful in the UK or Europe, it's considered like, oh, you mean you've got money and okay, well, we should sit down and work out how to get that off you because it's a bit dirty, isn't it? You should be really handing that back to everybody, apologizing as you do it, and then sink back down to, the level of what the wider population thinks is acceptable. It's catastrophic. I think the US, as a UK person, we with envy look particularly at the Californian community or New York community, let's say, but generally America, and think, gosh, like you just hold on high. People have been successful. I know you enjoy beating on people like Elon, and he deserves it for his unfortunate last couple of years. But anyway, and you enjoy beating on some of them. But generally, when somebody's been successful, you celebrate that, right? You've got a culture that built that nation out of not a huge amount in the last living memory, 200 years almost. We've got this terminal affliction here of being queasy about success, which is a real problem. So I guess you invite that if you are smashing around in a Lamborghini being an arrogant arse, then you probably deserve that. But we've got to rediscover this self-confident, success rewarding spirit here. I mean, I thought you were going to ask me who did I want in one of your earlier questions. Who did I want to chat to? But rightly, I'd like to chat to my father rather than some historical figure. But actually, I was about to be primed and say I'd like to chat to some of the people who, in the British Empire days, again, caveat, lots of bad stuff happened, but also people like Brunel, who, imagined steamships and bridges with rivets the size of my head, holding pieces of steel together that I don't know how humans even moved in those days, let alone built things with. The ambition, the confidence, the kind of culture that in France built the Eiffel Tower as a showpiece for the grand exhibition just for a couple of weeks. Who does
that, right?
People like Elon and Bezos, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos think like that. And frankly, the Chinese do. I want us to try and rediscover that spirit. I think, and be proud of it, because we've got to. Otherwise, our whole culture here is going to struggle. We've built everything from light bulbs to iPads and electric cars and whatever on the foundation of that ambition. And we've got to rediscover it. And importantly, enroll the wider population in it, not just have a handful of billionaires getting this right and everybody else wondering what their purpose is.
Yeah, so you really touched on something there, and I wrote about this in my book, but I've spent a lot of time in the Nordics, and there's this notion of Jantologen, which is the law of Janta, and it's sort of expressed in this spectrum across these countries in the Nordics. And it was really shocking for me, Richard, in the beginning when I started interviewing these amazing people there who were really afraid to share their success story.
Yeah.
And it was like, I'm so confused. You don't want to share this story, or you don't want to communicate this outside of the community?
Yeah.
And then you learn more and more about it, and you start to see that from the younger generation, it's bubbling up, right? They're seeing what's going on in the US and in other places saying, no, we want that, as if there's a repression. And so I'm struck by, to your point, what is the long-term effect? What's the residual effect if we don't figure out a happy middle here, where we don't just have, like, to your point, like the Elons, but we have all these wonderful sort of people in between, where innovation doesn't have to be as grand as what you've accomplished, right? But it also doesn't have to be as small as something where we feel like it's inconsequential.
But it's critical. It's everywhere. I mean, it's right down to any company. Any company has to have a spirit of innovation in it, right? Because no matter what product you're selling, you'll have competitors, right? And the innovation on a day-to-day level, in that, I don't know, monthly meeting with a new grad who says, look, I've been here a month, and why are we making it like this? I've got this idea where we could do this. All too often, certainly in this side of the Atlantic, the middle management turns to boss and says, I might not work, I don't think we should do it. And right, the grad goes, the new entrant, the new hire goes, what? Oh, that's disappointing. Why wouldn't we do that? I could do it in a weekend. And that spirit, right? Again, US is much better than Europe, but I think you're slipping as well, unfortunately. That spirit is what by 1,000 cuts, 1,000 snuffing out of that little burning idea, we are gradually going to get poorer, and we're gradually not going to enjoy comfortable lives. Our kids are going to not have opportunities to go and do work placements and grow into companies. We are really unnecessarily going to just neuter our ability to grow into all these amazing technologies that are coming. And it's so reversible. I'm trying to lobby our own government using what we've done yes, okay, look, what we've done is pretty unusual, but it's the same spirit. It's the same spirit of going and imagining something new and not being afraid to get your hands dirty to try and explore it, right? And recognizing that failure is okay as long as it's recoverable. That's all I'm trying to get our government to try and promote at every level. I want nursery schools, to universities, to every level, even in big, boring sort of semi-state corporates. I want them to be recognizing this. I mean, I'll say something controversial. If I say Black Lives Matter and Me Too, right, everybody goes and winces because they think, gosh, those are really genuinely important, powerful movements that mean a lot to a lot of people, in some cases, life and death. I want 5% of that emotional impact, but to be attributed to innovation, which is a hard ask, I agree, because most people can't even define what this awful word innovation really means. But if we can get that into a narrative at a national level in our Western culture here, where people go, oh yeah, it's that fumbling, chaotic thing where a small percentage of our population seem to go and do it. But our job as everybody else is to go and respect it, notice it when it crosses our path and go, oh, it's one of those things I shouldn't just crush because it might fail. I've got to simply take a moment and go, how can I give that idea a chance at coming to fruition, either failing survivably, recoverably, or it might just be the new thing that my company, my community, my kid, my parent, might then actually see become something that ends up employing people, generating tax revenues, and in a small way, nudging our fumbling cultures further into the future in a positive way, right? It's just so infuriating. We don't have that we've lost it at the moment, and it's annoying.
It's very annoying. I would contend, and this is just biased because of the work that I do in storytelling, but to me, part of that challenge is that, we'll innovate and create something, and we just talk about it from a benefit. You can download more songs, or you can, just feels it's almost at an arm's length. Whereas the movements you brought up and mentioned, there's something visceral, right? Whether people, wherever they are in their agreement, it's human. It reminds them about what it means to be human. And I'm sorry, but there's so many technologies out there that do, I think, the exact opposite. All they do is sort of strip our emotionality away and make everything look as if it's a finished product, and it basically brings our dreams into a reality state.
This is where I worry about some of the impact of social media, right? Everybody's talking about the impact of social media and should our kids be blocked from it, whatever. The narrative I've not heard much talk about, maybe it's going on, but is that when I was a kid, I was really, I had lots of little passions, right? So I get really obsessed about, I don't know, tanks or something for like 9 months or so. And then I'd want to read all about them. I'd do everything I could about them. And then that'd die off and I'd off I go again, There was one about radio controlled helicopters, way before drones. They were when I was a kid, they were unobtainably expensive, right? And I'd go to a model shop, beg my father to take me there once every couple of months. And I'd stare up in the ceiling of these amazing machines. I'd try and save money, and I'd maybe get a model aircraft magazine once every few weeks or something, but I think there was something delicious about the intangibility of that. I worry now that if I had the same dream as a kid, I'd go on Instagram, I'd type in #RC helicopter, and I'd see instantly everybody doing the best that you can ever imagine. And I worry I'd be passionate for about 10 minutes and then think, somebody's done it already, haven't they? And then I just move on, and I teach myself that everything's been done before. And everybody, there's loads of people better than me. I'm never going to be a world champion RC helicopter builder. I'm never going to build my own shop or my own company or my own model aircraft. Yeah, sort of done. And I think we've got to do everything in our power to try and undo that damage. I think we've got to try and remind our children, by no means has everything been done already. I still get in interviews, I was on this military exercise, can't say where, and it was a US guy. He was a nuclear scientist, really fascinating, lovely guy. And actually, I could see it in his eyes. He was just blown away. He was watching us fly. He was there doing something different from us. And he came up to me and, oh my God, you know what it is? You've made me believe that not everything has been invented before. Because you know, pointing at me, in the last 9 years, went from believing in something that was supposed to be impossible and then actually physically creating it. I've now watched you fly it. You've now rekindled my belief. And this guy must have been in his 40s. You've now rekindled my belief that not everything's been done already. And he's in his 40s. So like, what are we doing to our children, making them think that probably everything's been done? We've got to, can I throw something else out there? When you give a small child, I don't know, pick the age, a few years old, a Lego box, they rip it into two pieces. Everything goes everywhere and they start messing around, right? And most of us as parents go to them like, you rip the instructions, we'll sellotape them back together again. Right, start from the beginning, go from section 1, and we'll kind of beat them over the head, hopefully not physically, to go and follow the instructions to do what it says on the box that's now also taped back together. I think we need to stop doing that. We've got to actually enjoy them sticking the Lego bricks back together or in any horrible configuration that they just imagine, and watching it fall apart and then having another go. That's the core skill, not least in an AI world. That's the magic that we accidentally kind of withdrawn out of our children as they grow up. I've tried not to, but that's, I think, an encapsulation of the problem.
I love that. And I couldn't agree more. I would say that it makes me think, I jokingly said to a friend the other day, I said, we're sort of in this world now where, everything's just, it's all going to be done for us. Like everything that we need, that we do in our day to day can be physically done by robots and all these other sort of inventions. And I said, is it going to get so absurd that you're going to find lawn mowing like groups, social groups, where like a group of dads just get together on a Saturday and mow some plot of land just to feel again what it meant to be human in like 1995?
Oh, and they'll do it with little reciprocating single piston engined unreliable mowers and delight when one breaks, right?
That's right.
They will talk about that weekend for weeks to come, right? Because otherwise you just sit there like an idiot watching a disc just moving around effortlessly, quietly doing it for you. You do touch on something. It really is an existential question. What is the purpose of us if we carry on this trajectory? And what are you supposed to do as a child growing up into this world? I mean, driving. Here's a crazy one, right? I'm sure you've thought about this before, but can you imagine our children's children asking us about the days when you used to be able to get in a 2-ton metal box and you were in control and you went past another one just to make it more dangerous. Another one would come the other way, inches from you, and all that was stopping you killing them and yourself was just a little jiggle of your fists.
That's right.
That is going to blow people's minds, right? That is,
and I think an extension to that,
salts as a health benefit, whatever.
I wonder if those children will grow up and want to have kids, because I think the question about, in essence, why did our generation want to have children and those before us, right? That you get a second chance you almost get to see it from a bird's eye view, the wonderment that you experienced, when you're little and everything seems big. And when you grow up and you say, well, this is where I grew up, but that room looks really small to me now, right? Perception, frame, everything changes. And if everything has an answer, I just wonder if the desire to have children in the way that we just take for granted.
Well, I think your answer's there already. I mean, the birth rate is collapsing in every Western country. I mean, there's a practical reason, because it's so expensive, and you look at it economically, and the family unit and all this kind of stuff. That's a whole nother podcast. But I think hidden underneath that is the motivation. Why do you want to bring a child up in a world that seems so uncertain and volatile? I mean, it's got very volatile even in the last 4 days. Yes, but why would you sit back and go, well, I've got all the resources and I've built a nest and I'm confident and excited about the future? I mean, that's not there, is it? So no, it's a scary looking future, to be honest. But I think we've got all the resources to be able to nudge, the younger generations to be inspired again. inspiration is a very loose word thrown around a lot, but I think just remind them of that journey, of that wonderment of, like, ripping apart the Lego box and on attempt 5 or 6 building something that you point to as a kid and go to your parents, I've built a dinosaur and it's hardly recognizable as a dinosaur, but in your little mind it's got 2 legs and it's standing up and it's got little arms, and you are so proud of that. And that little journey has inspired you to go and create and embrace failure in the pursuit of something that you've created. I think it's just as simple as that. And we've lost it at the moment.
So a few years ago, I interviewed a futurist. And what sat with me, Richard, was he said, you know what, the younger generation is getting actually pretty annoyed with the physical world. And I inquired, and he said, well, they're getting annoyed with the physical world because they can alter the digital world. And that's where their mind's eye is cast upon, right? With that as sort of the backdrop, take me literally and figuratively into the air, right, with gravity. Meaning, how has your perception of life here on the physical sort of, earth, how does it change? Like, how does your relationship to time, has that been impacted when you are literally above the physical ground and you're flying? Because that's what, the minute I started watching and following, I started following your stuff years ago, and it just happenstance that we're here today. But that was my main question when I first saw it. As I wondered if time slowed down. I wonder what it's like to be suspended from a world of physical constraints.
Yeah, again, another great question. You're good at this. It's a very cheesy answer, but when I am asked, what does it feel like to fly in one of our suits? The best analogy that resonates with most people is that occasionally, as an adult or even a kid, you have that dream of flying. You're walking, you're running, and then you step, and there's that moment where you just lift off. And sometimes it's like, you have that falling feeling, and it gets way too high too quickly, and then just as you're falling, you wake up again. Whatever the outcome, hopefully it's more positive than that. It does genuinely feel like that freedom. You can think where you want to go, and you go. There's no conscious effort or movement. Just like when you're running across a field, you don't think consciously about each foot placement or your legs, do you? You think, I'll go over there. Or like playing football, as in soccer, you could think, I'm going to go there. Your consciousness just says, I want to go over there. But you've now got that, but in 3-dimensional space. So you're not consciously aware of what you do. It is ridiculous. Again, back to that Iron Man film, when he's trying to learn in his Tony Stark garage, with all his fancy cars and stuff, there's a moment where he stiffens up and straightens up and gets it and then just flies. I had the CGI guys who did that scene reach out when we launched back in 2017 and delight that in the films you can see on our social media, and there's the TED Talk I originally did, which has got the development clips, there was a moment, and we see it with every client we have, where you just look up and smile like an idiot and you never think about it again. And it is the parent letting go of the bicycle saddle and the kid looking back nervously and going, oh my God, I'm doing it, and never thinking again. There's something really, really magic about how your very powerful balance engine in your mind that can do walking and running and hopping and even closing your eyes, you can still walk around, that recalibrates and just gets it. And then you're done. And you've uploaded Matrix style and you never think about it again. No skill fade ever, nothing. So you do have this wonderful freedom. And I mean, we did this race in Dubai. If you look on the Gravity Industries YouTube channel and look down for the race film, it's done a lot of views. Doing that with other people in the air was even more amazing because you're now in a 3-dimensional dream of freedom, but with other people looking at you, smiling also like idiots, moving in this 3-dimensional free kind of way. And last thing I'll say on it, I got some interesting data on this. Somebody once was doing some PhD and sort of trying to analyze brainwaves, and they stuck a load of patches all over my head. And I was walking around with this thing, and there's all this chaos of all these lines going everywhere, like stock market trends. And then I put it on, fired up the suit, and as soon as I pulled the trigger, accelerated the engines, and then just vectored down because you fly it by vectoring. As I went up in the hover and I looked at this girl who's doing the analysis, I looked at her and I just said I was going to be hovering for a minute and then I'd land again. She looked up like in complete amazement at me. And I didn't know what it was. And I waited the minute, landed, shut down. And she just went, I've like rarely ever seen this. All the noise went calm. She said the only time she'd seen that before was in flow state with like racing drivers and people like that. And she said that was weird because there's a lot going on when they're like racing and they're really focused, and there's been a lot written about flow state. But your conscious perception when you're flying is you're utterly relaxed. It's completely calming. And she said, I've never really seen that when somebody's been doing a physical sport like that. But everything went calm. And it kind of makes sense because that, to answer your question, that is the feeling you have when you're flying. It's just effortless. It is very, I never imagined this when I built the concept, but it is quite calming, quite sort of euphoric when you're in that state.
I'm curious, when you're in that state, help me understand your sort of the active thinking that you're doing. Do you find, like, I equate it, this maybe sounds like a very odd connection here, but I equate it to feeling in the zone when I'm writing. And I'm listening to the Interstellar movie, the score. Right?
I am a Hans Zimmer addict. That is so inspirational. I built the early parts of the company with like the some of the Batman Hans Zimmer tracks on just repeat. They're so
that's how I am.
Like a massive syringe of deep emotional inspiration, isn't it? Anyway, carry on.
It is. No, you're exactly right. Cornfield Chase was the one I would play for 6 to 8 hours in a loop.
Completely. Yeah.
And so when I'm in that state, there will be those brief moments where I can recognize myself in that state. And I have to, it's almost like I acknowledge it, but I don't want to leave my sort of that flow state. And so what I've found is that makes me, I feel like I'm completely open to every story I've ever been in front of, so that I can in real time make associations and then integrate these stories. And so I'm wondering, is that similar to you in flight? Do you find that you are just, I think the other side of that is, you go on vacation and there's the arc of a vacation. And towards that last third of the vacation, you say, in 2 days, I'm going to be back at the office. Like, can I just soak up the beach here in my mind's eye? And you say, no, come on, I shouldn't be thinking about that. I just want to enjoy the moment.
Yeah, I would say I hear exactly what you're saying in that sort of writer's, like everything, the flow state of concentration in a way. And yet I think that's more similar to the racing driving thing, where they just perceive everything, but it's almost like they're a back seat. It's almost like your conscious mind has taken a bit of a back seat, let your subconscious come in and actually start to just open the world out. And it's all just in Technicolor. I get that. The flying is more like, it's more like there's all the voices are quiet. It's more like the holiday thing. It's more like riding a motorbike or a bicycle, like fast down a hill, and the wind's in your hair and everything's crazy and brilliant, and it's just euphoria. There's no work, there's no burden, there's no effort to do anything, and there's no conscious thought about manipulating yourself through three-dimensional space. It's just you go wherever your mind wants to take you. It's more that, I would say.
So I want to, as we're sort of coming down to our landing here, that's a terrible way to say that. So I'm going to say this, and I love your sort of take or spin on it, right? So we have, this notion of like the hero's journey, but I can't fathom that you're sitting down at dinner with Debbie or Oliver and Thomas and talking about things as if you're a hero. That just does not ring true to even my experience with you today. But if we apply sort of that notion of the life cycle or the lifespan and the arc of an experience for what we're calling a hero, but we do so with maybe the label of an explorer. Mm-hmm. I think we've grown up in storytelling to know that while everything that we see on the surface is the accomplishment and even maybe some of the failure, sometimes the underbelly is the thing that we don't see. And it's the fear, it's the potential sadness that once you achieve whatever it is you set out, that it didn't yield what you originally maybe hoped for. And I'm just wanting to understand your relationship to your own explorer journey. And how it's impacted you far beyond what we see publicly.
Yeah, that's another good question. So I'm consciously aware, I've become very consciously aware about this unfulfilled ambition fulfillment thing. So, 16 years in a corporate environment, but I percolated to running a trading book. So it's like an entrepreneurial risk-taking zone that could scratch that itch a bit, but within the safety wrapper of an organization that would pay my mortgage. Then an outlet was joining the military. I love the human endeavor, the pushing boundaries, the never say die kind of thing that the military does really well. And my outlet was very physical. I could sort of cause myself physical pain. I didn't want to risk the family and the money and go down the route that my father went down, giving up the day job. However, the clock was ticking, and once I built enough of solidity in my home life, I thought, there was too many opportunities that came along, and it was just unavoidable. The hardest thing I've done in my life, though, was going down that road that felt like I was in danger of reproducing all the ingredients that had ultimately culminated in that awful outcome. But having got through that, yes, it does feel like I put a hell of a lot of effort in to get here, but I've achieved so much. I often I've joked with a few people who are similarly minded. We've got a lot of unusual people in my team who've been through a lot in their own lives. And with those kind of people, we do joke, if you fell under a bus tomorrow, it'd be a bit like, I can't really complain. I've done several lifetimes worth of stuff. The places I've been, the things I've done. I mean, we've flown this equipment in 53 countries. I mean, with the things we've done is mad. But so what afterwards? Once you've climbed the mountain, you realize that the journey was the climbing, not actually getting at the top and looking at the view. That I think my next mission really is kind of what I got exercised about earlier. It is trying to scale the learnings I've had on this journey. It's like I've exercised my father's demons, but it was the society at large. It was the ecosystem that kind of killed him, that didn't recognize, gosh, we've got a really talented creative engineer. Let's wrap him in the commercial environment and a society that says, my goodness, that's amazing. You could be employing 1,000 people with an amazing company in 5 years. Let's help you and support you. Not let's just constantly beat you down. And why do entrepreneurs always write books about how damn hard it was? What's Elon's thing about chewing glass and staring into the abyss? I don't find that acceptable anymore. It's people like him, like Musk, and millions of other on a smaller scale that fuel the economy and fuel the technologies and the products and services that employ everybody and that put food on the table and everything. Why are we making it so difficult that when somebody dares have a new idea, that's the origin of all this? So I think, to answer your kind of question, I mean, I want to make it my mission to do everything I can to try and kind of use our platform. We're very well known around the world for what we've done, to try and shine a light on these values, to try and remind people what innovation is, and then try and instill in the wider society a recognition that failure and risk are vital ingredients, and it doesn't have to be scary. If you make that recoverable, it can be okay. And when it crosses your path, try and find a way to support and nurture, not just automatically kill, that spark that could become the corporation that employs your kids and pays your tax bills. You know what I mean? It's that. I'd love to see if I can make some inroads on that. It's a ludicrous challenge. It's pushing a very large ball of, uphill. But anyway, I love a silly challenge. So there you go. That's probably.
I would contend, Richard, that it's actually it's this kind of conversation, because we can get excited when we see obviously the jet suit and people flying around or whatever the sort of the innovation is. But I always find it's that backstory. Right? It doesn't mean that a young person is going to say, I want to take flight or I want to find a new way to do it. It's going to be that, you know what? I listened to this. I heard the story of Richard Browning and what it's like to be a dad, but more importantly, what it smelled like in his dad's double garage. It was his workshop, and how even when he now is at a military base in some undisclosed location on the planet, he is reminded of the relationship of his dad. Like, that's the kind of thing I think that reminds us we're human and provides an opportunity and a runway to open that Lego box, let it all explode. And I think that if anything, that's the gift beyond the flight.
Oh, I have no doubt. I mean, it's a very successful company. We are changing some of the medic response, military, special forces stuff, and we really want to build the race series, and we carry on doing events and all this kind of stuff. But no, it's using it as a very tangible example to catch people's imagination. And then when they ask, well, how did that come about? It's all that I've done hundreds of talks all over the world. And I'm trying to scale this particularly with sort of young people as to how can we use this as that spark that tries to offset some of those negative forces that we talked about earlier, that are trying to tell them that everything's already been done before and it's not worth getting off your ass and trying, and that failure is terrible. It's all of that. I'd be very proud if we can keep using our journey for that purpose. And I was going to say, actually, and we had one recently, there was an amazing email from a girl that's just started at one of your top-end universities in the US doing aeronautical engineering. And she said, it's this amazing thing. She said when she was 12, it was like 60 Minutes or something like that. It was one of your quite, headline shows, and it was featuring us back in the day. And she said within 20 minutes, I knew what I wanted to do with my career.
Wow.
Yeah, it's that is quite a, sort of, it does choke me up, realizing that, she hadn't even contacted us then. She contacted us when she had already started her degree. That's pretty powerful.
That's it. That's impact, right? That is incredible impact. Well, Richard, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this conversation. And I will say to the audience, yes, I've been very lucky to spend time around some very consequential people across society and across the planet. And I'm always reminded of innovation in my world where I am pleasantly surprised by the humanity and the stories behind the people that are fueling our future in so many ways. And I would add Richard to that list. What an incredible man who is much more to me about the innovation he wants to see in the mind's eye of young people and what that can do based on the achievements of he and his team. But you can learn more and go to Gravity Industries. They're all, I know you guys have seen them on Instagram, and you can go to richardbrowning.com. Check out his book, Taking on Gravity, A Guide to Inventing the Impossible from the Man Who Learned to Fly. Once again, I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger. You've been listening to The Narrative Edge. You can get your copy of the book wherever books are sold. And remember that the Narrative Edge takes you around the world of storytelling, returning you to your story and the moments that define a life in motion. I want to thank my friends at Rick Productions and encourage you to check them out if you're looking to broadcast your ideas. Until next time, my friends, and remember that if you're not in control of your story, well, who is?